Joining us to discuss the tributes to the president, San Diego State history professor Pierre Asselin.
Professor, good morning. Thanks for joining us again. Well, I mean, as promised, that was emotional to see 43 President George W. Bush break down at the end there. That really just hit you right in the heart.
It really does. I mean, it really, and you watch this stuff and you kind of think about your own father and all of these things, and that was a very, very great, I think, eulogy. I mean, but I also thought that the other two speakers, Simpson and Mulroney, were
very good.
Yeah, I mean, as a Canadian, right? I mean, Mulroney and Bush had a really, really great friendship. Yeah. And I really feel that Mulroney really kind of nailed Bush's personality and his impact on history as president.
True.
We've watched different events over the past few days. This morning, the funeral starting. It'll continue throughout the day. Watching over the past few days, what really stood out for you? What were some moments that were very, very special?
I think you got a really good sense of his personality. I think that, I mean, it's unfortunate. It took his death for us to kind of think more carefully about the kind of president and the kind of man that Bush, the father, was. And sure enough, right, you during the eulogies today, we heard a certain adjectives be repeated at almost ad nauseum, right? Yeah. This was a dignified man. This was a gentleman. This was an honorable man. And Bush certainly brought that to the presidency. We've seen presidents over the recent past kind of take the presidency not necessarily as seriously as perhaps we want them to, but Bush was presidential to the extreme. And I think the last few days have given us a chance to appreciate that.
And you mentioned the adjectives because I was taken by that as well. A decent, loyal, kind, humble, self-effacing, empathetic, a patriot, selfless.
Yeah.
But everybody brought up the sense of humor, like you mentioned with Mulroney and you mentioned with Senator Simpson. It's that friendship that he created. And I think Senator Simpson pointed out something very, very intriguing to me. George Bush was a one-term president. And he knew when he made that bipartisan bill that required him to raise taxes, he knew in that instant that for the good of the country, to pass a bipartisan bill, that would be what would get him to be a one-term president, and he did it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of how remarkable that man was. His son mentioned that he's going to be remembered as a great president, and I think it's for that policy among others, right? I mean, there's every reason we historians firmly believe that this is absolutely true, that he knew exactly what he was getting into, but he put the country above himself.
The fact that he knew in that moment, this is going to cost me my re-election.
Yeah, and with all that brought, I mean, he did lose re-election, right, and he felt profoundly humiliated by that. But I mean, in hindsight, always kind of abided by his decision to do what he did because that was necessary for the country, and that's really kind of, I think this is a very, very good example of the kind of man that he was.
Former Senator Bob Dole's tribute, especially touching. I want to re-show that moment. Watch this. Oh, Pierre, what a moment.
It's really, really kind of fighting the tears here because, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, Dole, just like Bush, right? Both consummate politicians, guys who took what they did for the country very seriously and served in politics, but also, I mean, they're both combat veterans.
Right.
And that's a bond that very few people in Washington have, and I mean, Dole's reaction is...
You see his reaction right there. I mean, it says it all.
It really does, I think it.
When George H.W. Bush left the presidency, he did make a point, and you are a historian, that historians will really write the book on his presidency, on who he was. Sum it up for us, if you will. before we leave?
So I think, you know, I mean, history kind of goes through trends, right? I mean, we tend to be very critical of presidents the moment they leave office. And then with the passage of time, slowly but gradually, we develop a more objective sense. Yeah. We get access to archives, and we get to appreciate the kinds of constraints that these guys faced. And you tend to develop kind of a better appreciation and a respect for what I mean, and presidents do, but definitely, I mean, and I think that the speakers today kind of hit on that. Bush will be remembered as again, not necessarily a very colorful president, but a very, very effective and important president, again, given the context within which he ruled the United States.
The transitions the world was going through during his presidency, almost unmatched. Pierre Asselin, a professor, thank you so much for your insight this morning.
My pleasure.